and thank you for coming and joining us tonight. It's wonderful to see so many of you here. My name is Andrew Blake, and in case you're wondering about my unusual accent, I'm Canadian-German by origin and spent most of the last 10 years in New Zealand, so it's a bit all over the place. My wife, Moana, who's back there, and I have been VillageTowns stewards since 2004. Our daughter Layla, who's looking after the camera work tonight, grew up with the idea, and we're all three quite determined to making this project happen somewhere on this planet. We have two reasons for that. One is personal. We want to see our children and their children grow up there, and we want to grow old in such a community. And the other reason is that this framework is the most comprehensive in regards to achieving global change that we have come across in all of our travels. And that's why we put our hearts and our lives into it. The project, or the concept that Claude will be presenting to you in a minute, is so far outside the box as anything you've ever seen. And some of you will love it for that, and others might hate it for that. That's life. Change has always been welcomed by some and rejected by others. Our job as VillageTowns stewards is to present the idea to you and assist you in figuring out what the opportunities are for you as the people of Hopland and Mendocino County. And that's all that our task is at hand. So again, thank you for coming, and let's get to it. It's a pleasure for me to introduce to you the founder of VillageTowns, and please welcome with me Claude Lewenz.
I'm amazed and so pleased that so many people have come tonight. We were told maybe expect 20 or 30. And I'll also have to say this is, I'm not a professional speaker, and this will be the first time I've presented a concept like this to an audience where this is a possibility to happen here. And so I also have a tendency to talk too long and answer questions too much, and so I've asked her to please have other people help me keep this on time and on schedule.
That's my job.
She's got a hook. So first of all, my name is Claude Lewenz. I grew up in Baltimore and met my wife in Bellingham, Washington, where I was running a community mental health center. I have a degree in history and a master's degree in education. So the only connection I've ever had to building anything is when we moved to New Zealand. We built our house there out of earth brick, and they have a very sustainable building industry there, and I learned it all by doing the designs and things myself. So I'm not a developer. I'm not in real estate, and occasionally we'll get the words wrong, but I am a fast learner. Now, we call ourselves VillageTowns stewards, and when we got up here, we were told that actually what you are is a social entrepreneur. So I went and looked it up, and it says that social entrepreneurs are individuals with innovative solutions to society's most pressing problems. They're ambitious and persistent, and my wife agreed. Tackling major social issues and offering new ideas for wide-scale change. Rather than leave societal needs to the government or business sector, social entrepreneurs find what is not working and solve the problem by changing the system, spreading the solution, and persuading entire societies to move in different directions. And I think that's a reasonable description of what we are and what we're doing here tonight. First thing to emphasize is that Mendovito is just a name. There's no company, it's not a corporation, there are no backers or anything like that. The background of this is that in 2007, I wrote a book called How to Build a Village. And in essence, it put forth a lot of ideas that I've been working on for years. Because like a number of people that may be in this room tonight, certainly there are quite a few in Mendocino County, who are just saying, it's not working. The systems aren't working. Things aren't happening the way they should be. And I've been involved in the kind of things where we successfully stop bad development, we do that sort of thing, and then afterwards there's this kind of, okay, we succeeded in stopping, but what are we doing positively? What are we leaving for the next generation? How are we improving life? And so I started work on that and put that into a book. And interestingly, it got picked up by a bookstore here in Ukiah, and quite a number of people apparently read it. We had moved with our family. I moved with my family in 1997 to Waiheke Island in New Zealand, where I built our house. And part of the reason we did that is we wanted a place to raise our daughter the way I grew up, and probably the way a number of you grew up, a bit of a Tom Sawyer upbringing, where you weren't worried about your kid, you just rang a bell and they came home. And we couldn't find that. We found that finally in this community in New Zealand. We moved there. But it still wasn't really what I felt was needed. And so I wrote the book, and then people started coming from California consistently, came down and said, you should look at California. This is where we'd like to have you come up. And so in 2010, I came up to Sonoma County, and I spent about a month there. And what I found was it just wasn't going to work in Sonoma County. And in part it was because the water laws weren't right. And and I'm going to talk more about that later, but then things started changing again, and in 2013, one of those Sonoma people came up and met with Dan Hamburg and I guess other folks here, and came back with a report that basically said you should really look at Mendocino County. And so in September of last year, a group of us, including Andrew and Moana and others, came here and we met with lots of folks, and we left saying this is possible. And then in December I was invited back by Dan to meet a sort of good cross-section of people in the community, both in Hopland and in other parts, sort of full range politically as well, and came away saying this really is something that we should investigate, see if it's feasible. And so in March, somebody offered free lease of a house in Ukiah for 8 months. Somebody else said, here's a car you can have. And basically they made it feasible for us to come up here and start investigating. And so we began a process that I'm going to describe. But first, there is a question about what are we talking about and where, and so I thought it would be useful if I just showed a couple pictures. One is the picture I took, and the next one is the picture that we did with some Photoshop. So this is McDowell Valley here, and that's taken from 175 from the grade. And then the other night, I did this where I put in on the land what it would look like, what actually a village town would look like on that particular land. So I'm going to just hop back and forth a couple times, and you sort of see what we're talking about. So we're not talking about suburban sprawl, we're not talking about filling up everything. It's a very compact design. It's based on the old European country towns that existed before there were cars. You go to these towns, and people go to them on vacation because they so love them, and you'll see that they have usually a stone wall or something, and on the other side of that it's green. And these towns have been there for centuries and they've never sprawled, that they have a fixed place they are. We just call it a historic district, so what you see would not be allowed to be changed for at least 50 years, and hopefully never. Now, the theory of a village town is best shown. I'm afraid I'm not much of an artist, and if there's anyone in the room who wants to help with good artist renderings, it'd be great. But this shows, in general, the idea behind a village town. Now what it is a town made of villages. So each of these separate yellow lines that you see there is showing a separate village. And a village has about 250 to 750 people, because that's the right size for people to know each other and naturally support each other. There's lots of science behind that shows that. The problem, of course, with the village is it's not big enough to support anything more than a general store. And you see this in Hopland, where they are not having the critical mass that they need. And so you need to make a town made of villages in order to get the numbers you need to get a fully operating, self-supporting economy. The other element you'll see there is that it's surrounded by a greenbelt. And that green belt is important so that, first of all, people have a real experience of nature. And it's also important, not as relevant in this case, because there really aren't neighbors, but it does prevent cross-boundary conflicts. It gives a buffer zone. The other two elements that it has is an industrial park, so that you have people actually making things. Now, an industrial park in Mendocino County probably is going to be green technologies. There seems to be more green knowledge. Environmentally sustainable products is a very strong element here, and we can see that happening. And then also the little bit of yellow is the motor pool, because one of the significant things about the a village town is that there are no cars within the urban core, that everything is within walking distance, bicycles, electric bikes, but no cars, no trucks. It's a car-free zone. In addition, you'll see in the middle of it what it says, the town center, the cosmopolitan town center, and that's an area where it gets a little bit bigger. The buildings are 4-story, there may be a few office buildings and apartment type of things. And that's in the middle of the center. All of these are based on what's called the pattern language. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but this is the #1 book selling in architecture, and it's been the #1 book on Amazon since 1977. And essentially it says, don't invent new if what has worked forever works. And so there are timeless patterns that guide what this will look like. Now, tonight, there are going to be 3 questions that I think are going to happen. The first of these is, should it happen? The second of these is, can it happen? And the third is, will it happen? Now, I'm going to spend much of my time in the first part of this talk about should it happen. Why I think we should be doing this. Why, as a society and a civilization, we need this, and very specifics about it, how to make that sort of thing happen. Now, can it happen is more of a scientific question. Now, the #1 question when I walked in here in December and met with the Farm Bureau is, how are you going to solve the water? And tonight, the #1 question, how are you going to solve the water? On the internet, the rumor, everything going around, how are you going to solve the water? I can assure you I would not have been here tonight if I hadn't already found what appear to be good scientific answers to that. But ultimately, the water question has to be not only backed by good science, but then the regional water board has to approve that. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. But can it happen is all sorts of these questions. And they were much more important ones, such as what is the legal process for getting entitlement, getting the permissions that you need? And we could have found out that they were drop dead. And we spent the first 3 months we were here, from March through June, looking essentially for what we call the drop deads. Because if it's not going to be possible to do it, we don't want to wasting our time starting to talk to people about it. We initially were talking about having group meetings like this, and we rapidly learned that's not how it works in Mendocino County. The way it works here is one-on-one. And so we would have one-on-one meetings with people, getting their views. They're extraordinarily varied. They also were really informed. And I must say I have to thank those people in the audience who I have met with for really giving us such great information and support that helped us see that. We then said, well, unless we can find some prospective land to do it on, we're wasting our time. And even though this is a very, very large county, there are not a lot of places that actually fit the criteria, that are reasonably flat, that are outside the flood zone, that are not at the end of a very long, windy road, or in a valley where there are lots of people who just would not be at all happy about it. It was actually a relatively small area that we finally saw might work. And what was very interesting was there were folks in the meeting in December who said, well, you should look at that property that used to be Billy Crawford's. And the interesting part is that when we were introduced to Scott and Jake, they were the ones who had that particular land. And so the can it happen are going to be questions tonight that I hopefully am prepared to answer. Questions like water, other ones like that. Will it happen is not our job at all. This is not something we're coming in and saying we want to do this on, it's not something being pushed in the way it would be if it was a developer. And so the will it happen is one that involves you as a community. after you understand this, do you say, yeah, this is a good idea, we should do it, we see it can happen, and therefore we want to make it happen? And so my job is to answer your questions. Tonight is essentially our first public meeting, and it is the report card. This is now, we have learned a lot of information about this county. The concept is called a framework, not a plan, because it has so changed from the, well, I don't have it, it is so changed from this original design. There are elements that are to fit this county that we hadn't thought of. And that is going to continue to be the case as long as there's an open mind to say, let's keep going with this. So the Will It Happen is going to be your role, and we hope that there will be more community dialogues on that. Now, when you walked in, I had a quote from our chairman emeritus, who's Stuart Udall, probably one of the most important environmentalists in the 20th century. And I won't read the long quote, but it was the last bit of it that really has become our motto, I guess. Or, we can create a world in which physical affluence and affluence of the spirit go hand in hand. It is the legacy we're going to leave future generations. We are here only a short time. We are tenants on the land. And what are we going to leave them? Now, that's what's been driving me. I have to say, what's been driving me is, first, I was a kid of the 60s. I was in that idealistic, optimistic, we can make a better world. And then I found myself doing an awful lot of protesting and saying, no, no, we have to stop this and stop that. Until finally it was, okay, now what are you going to do to actually improve it? And so this concept tonight about VillageTown, which, and we're calling it Mendo Vito for here, is about connection. That we have so significantly disconnected ourselves. And I want to just start with the ages and stages of life so you can get a bit of that idea. At this point, when I was a kid, generally you only had the husband working and kids were raised in a community at home. And then we started having two parents working and they both commuted away. They separated, they disconnected. The kids as early as 6 months old find themselves in daycare. And then from daycare, we put them into isolated, segregated schools, campuses, where they don't have the role models of adults. They don't get to be watching. I mean, even in this meeting tonight, I don't see any kids here. And so they don't see what adults do. They don't learn what it is to be role modeling from adults. And we then segregate them further in that we put them by age, by what year you're born, into a classroom. And their only role model is a teacher, whose job is to both educate them and control at the same time. And then we've done something recently even more detaching, and that is the glass screen. Whether it's this one or whether it's the computer screen, you'll see kids today spending their time down looking at their glass screen. And what they're doing is they're looking at life through the glass screen. They're not observing real people. They're not learning that experience. Now, it's very easy to solve that. All you have to do is take your classrooms and put them on the village plaza. And when you put them on the village plaza, have big windows so that they see the adults. And the next thing you do is you move all the destinations so the adults are working in the same community that they live. They shop in the same community. They go to the cafes and restaurants on their village plazas. And then you have the kids eating in those as well. So they learn how to behave themselves rather than learn what you learn in a school cafeteria. That also applies to the old people. Remember I said it was car-free. So in today's world, when you are old and you lose your license to drive, your really only option in most cases today is to move into a retirement home. In a village town, when you lose your license to drive, you don't notice because you've not been driving anyway. Then we go one further. On the plaza, we put nursing care facilities that are paid for in a self-insurance program by the whole community that basically say you're not going to go bankrupt, you're not going to end up on welfare because you're in nursing care. And that nursing care is on the plaza. So even if I have had a stroke and I'm in a wheelchair and I can't talk, when I get wheeled out into that plaza, the people who know me and love me are going to talk to me the way they used to. And the depression that my grandfather and my father suffered, and you know, all of you have somebody who suffered that when they went into nursing home, We don't do that to them. They remain honored in their community. Solo couples and families, well, that's the mainstream of life. And one of the things that's very important here is that when the children get older, you have to have blue-collar and white-collar jobs in that community, and then you have to have apprenticeships and internships so they have a way to integrate into that community. Not only that, you need affordable housing for them. And we have something called parallel markets that is intended to provide affordable housing forever for at least 25% of the community. I'm going to give a different example of it that's easier, because they recently did a story here where they said that the average teacher in the state of California makes $69,000. And that means they can afford a $225,000 house. In San Francisco, there's 0 houses. In Sonoma County, 3% of the houses can be afforded by teachers. So what ends up happening is they're having to commute in from somewhere else, or they just can't become a part of that community. So if you create a parallel market, you create a market for houses where you say, we'll sell it to you, the teacher, for $225,000. And you can sell it at any price when you go to sell it, but you can only sell it to another teacher. And that creates a separate market, a parallel market, that guarantees the teachers never get gentrified out of their community. You do that with the blue-collar workers who are in your industrial park. You do that with the people who run the laundry, who serve your food, who have all those jobs that are so important, and that in many societies today we shove aside somewhere, or we create some special low-income housing for them. No, if you want a complete community, you have to design for that, and you have to make sure it's there. And there's a model of that was done in England in a place called Poundbury, and you cannot tell who's low income and who's not unless they disclose it to you, because the houses all they're all buried, but there's not a special district for it. They're just folks living there. And so there are many other elements of this, and all of these patterns woven together start creating freedom and justice in a community. And I mean real freedom, because when you have a community that takes care of itself, that carries its own weight and is not interfered with by the outside as much, the government's not coming in, other people aren't, the first thing you have is we're going to create a community where it's safe for kids to be anywhere in that community and not have somebody always having to keep an eye on it. It's real freedom and autonomy. It's what we call the Tom Sawyer upbringing. I had it, I loved it, I want to see kids of this generation having it and future generations having it. Now, I'd like to shift then to some specific hot topics and how we address those. The water, I'm going to talk really briefly now because I'm sure there are going to be plenty of questions and we could spend quite a bit of time on that one. But we were brought into Australia in the middle of the worst drought they've ever had. Their equivalent of the Mississippi River dried up. They were about a year away from having to close a 1 million population city, and they were in much more desperate shape, and they said, we have got to change how we deal with water. And we said, well, the obvious thing here is to look at how you use water and start segregating that. Because what it turns out, I have a little book here that I got here, and it says about 95% of the water that gets delivered to our houses goes down the drain. I think actually quite a bit of it doesn't even make it to the drain, it's used to water your lawn. And so we looked at this and we said, one, don't have lawn watering, don't have that sort of thing, use native plantings, we all know those. But the other one's a little bit more different, and that is that you separate, you have multi-pipes coming in and out of your house. And each of those pipes does a particular thing, so that the piping that goes for your toilet has the extraction of the nutrients in that, but it never gets mixed with anything else. It simply becomes what's called a closed-loop system. And I'll describe that in much more detail, but what it results in is needing about 2% of the water that you would need if you have a single pipe system coming in and out of your house, the way we do in most of the United States. This would not be possible without the Rainwater Harvesting Act of 2012 and the Water Recycling Act, the Water Reuse Act of 2012. And that's why we came back when we saw that California passed those two acts. We said, now we can talk to you because you have new legislation. Nobody's taken advantage of that legislation at the level we're talking about, and that's why it's going to be really new, and as Andrew said, really outside the box. Land use, essentially sprawl, isn't going to work. if we were going to see the population of the world drop to half of what it is, maybe we wouldn't have this conversation. But we're being told by 2049, there are 40 million people right now when the environment, in 1970, there were 20 million, now there are 40 million. In 2049, they say there'll be 50 million. No idea where we're going to put them, how we're going to deal with feeding them, how we're going to deal with water. We need new models. And essentially, we need models. Now, some people are saying we should live like they do in Shanghai. First of all, it doesn't work because it's earthquake, but I've been to Shanghai, and I don't think that's a good way for people to live in these massive high-rise buildings. And so, land use, we're talking about a compact, low-impact design. Food. We're eating food from all over the world. When I talk to the food co-op here, they say actually it's difficult sourcing local food from Mendocino County. One of the concepts that came from Mendo that was not here when we walked in last December is the rooftop greenhouse. That if you have 135 acres of buildings, you put up 135 acres of rooftop greenhouses. That harvests your rainwater. That it harvests enough rainwater that you need, even in the drought of 2013, there would have been no shortages by harvesting that for drinking. That grows your food, and it has substantial growth using, and I'll talk about this later, there's a 2,000-year-old soil science developed by the Native Americans in the Amazon basin called terra preta soils, and it grows about 8 times the amount of food productivity using biochar. And of course, there's a biochar initiative in Mendocino County already. People know what it's about. Transport is really quite simple. We have to move our destination, so we're no longer walking or no longer driving to accomplish everything that we do every day. And so you create a walking home range. It's a zoologist concept. Where do you go every day? That doesn't mean we take the cars away. It means we take the need for the cars away. When you want to drive to Ukiah, you go to the motor pool. You can own a car if you want to have 15% of your income on it, or you can rent a car. And we'll have, the electric cars and the good stuff there. Energy use, we're talking about the most sustainable design we can make. That there is so much knowledge, and yet very few people pull it all together. And we have looked at phenomenal ideas on how to build sustainable buildings. And then we also have found that when you want to try and find experts, they're in the room. Thank you, John. You're here somewhere. And so the expertise is right down the road for all this. Finally, economic security, and what we're talking about here is multiple things. We're talking about not focusing on selling houses, but rather attracting head of household jobs. There are a lot of people in Mendocino County we met who have kids who are working in the Bay Area or somewhere else, would like to move back here, and some of them can actually move their companies, their jobs, their businesses back here. And so the focus is on creating a self-supporting local economy. There's some other benefits to that. We've basically looked at the numbers of private non-farm jobs, and if you went to the maximum number that we think could happen here, it'd be a 27% increase in that for the whole county, 70% increase in local property taxes, about $500 million a year. And when we say new income, all we're calculating here is what is filed on tax returns, not the multiplier effect of that money spent, which is the sort of spin some people do. And that's going to be done on 0.01% of the county's land mass. Further, because we're not using a developer, there'll be profits that we estimate of 100 to 200 million, and that is to be left in the community, owned by the community, to serve the stockholders and the stakeholders. The stakeholders are the people and communities of Mendocino County, and the stockholders are the citizens who live in the village town. So it's important to emphasize, first, I've said it a few times, there is no developer, and this is not a development. This is a settlement. That Mendocino County was settled by settlers. The original ones, I'm not sure when your ancestors came, but 10,000 years ago. Then there was another influx of settlers who came in 1850, around then. And then in the 1970s, you had the back to the land people who now have become the supervisors, the judges, the key influencers. This has been something, but none of those really were developments. They were people who came and they settled. And the difference is that the settlers come and actually create their own community. So when a developer makes a decision, they make it based on pecuniary interest. How will it profit me? Whereas when somebody makes a decision about their own house, they say, this is something that I want, and it's going to be beautiful because I'm leaving it to my kids. They make decisions that aren't just purely monetary. America's gotten more bland, developments have gotten bland because the decision making is wrong. Now, when we were looking for a purpose statement, we found that Aristotle had written it 2,300 years ago, saying that when several villages come together to be economically self-supporting, the reason they continue is to enable their citizens to enjoy a good life. And that was described as the social pursuits of conviviality, citizenship, artistic, intellectual, and spiritual growth. We thought that was a very good explanation. It's not a value set, it's just this is a purpose statement. But to do it, you actually have to put your money where your mouth is. And so I'll only mention a couple of them. One is artist guild halls, that you build a guild hall, an artist center on each plaza. It's paid for by the profits of the community. The 25-member artists are given free housing, but none of this is free. They're expected to do their art and contribute to the cultural enrichment of the community. And so these are the concepts that we're bringing into this. Now, it's essentially an optimistic view for the future. We're talking about something, I know that my daughter came to me and she said, you know, Dad, every time I turn around, they're telling us to expect less, that life is going to be harder, that it's going to be, we're going to have climate change, we're going to have more people. It was quite a doom and gloom message. And I just said, that's the wrong message to be leaving the next generation. And this is a way to have a better message, and not just a message that will happen here. If it happens here, it will happen here first. But this is intended to be replicable. So this becomes the new model that spreads. That it's wealth creating, it's environmentally sustainable, it fulfills our potential as a society, and it leaves our kids a better world. So tonight, several invitations. If people are interested in it, I was on the phone with somebody today who said, you know, I'd love to pull together, I've always wanted to do this. If you can get 200 families together, you become one of those villages I pointed out. For Hopland, this is an economic opportunity that could be the gateway. The tribal opportunities is the next door neighbor. Significant opportunities there that we can talk about. And then for just Mendocino businesses, a huge opportunity that we're looking at. Because, for example, it's going to need 100,000 doors and windows. Do we buy those from China, or do we buy them from Georgia, or do we actually set up a factory up in Masonite to make 3-pane, really cool, sustainable windows that make your house quiet? And all of these kind of things are things that should be invitations to this, because it's going to be the extent to which you as a community wish to drive this, that this will happen. So what we're looking at next are going to be some questions on can it happen, some opinions, of which I have some, on should it happen, and then the dialogue, which is about that will it happen, which is if and how it could happen here. And with that, I'd like now to open it up to these questions, opinions, dialogue. We'd actually thought it was going to be a smaller group, and we could actually get people into dialogue with each other. But Kim is telling us with a group this large, it's more likely it'll be questions directed to me, and I'm going to really try and make them short in my answers. So thank you very much.